Hi, Mark from Sharkbait here. I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about Tiburon Engineering's reels, specifically the SST or Smart Shift reels. Tib reels are unique in the industry. They do some things that no other manufacturer's products do. So obviously worthy of note from that standpoint. As a company, Tiburon's been around. They're another West Coast firm, been out here for a lot of years. They got into the business doing some real modifications, real changes. Back in the day when most of what we fished were pin jig masters, 4.0s, 6.0s. They made a machined aluminum frame. Did some other kits that also included spools. And did some things to beef those reels up to make them more of a hot rod piece. Pretty much bread and butter. They slowed that part of their business down, and then they came back with that, maybe 8 years ago, I guess, and started remanufacturing those pieces one time per year, even going down to the squitter size pieces. And they really do a nice job that way. But they also had a bit of a capital infusion, which allowed them to take some designs they'd had for several years before and come out with their own line of reels. They'd always been a very strong engineering firm, a strong machining company. The guys that owned the firm love to fish, and they've been one of those little small mighty firms out there in the industry here in California, doing some very innovative things. The Smart Shift reels were the culmination of a dream they had for several years to make a reel that would shift automatically. It's a 2-speed piece, and they do that. They're very reliable, rock solid, simple in operation, incorporating all the best design features that the guys at Tib had for decades, literally. Tiburon also affiliated themselves with the folks from Okuma, maybe 2009, I believe, and that helped the Okuma guys, and it also helped the Tiburon folks. Tib, being a smaller company, had the ideas, didn't necessarily have the financial resources to do as much as they wanted to. Okuma had the financial resources and didn't have the know-how. So that was a very good marriage, and it allowed the folks at Tib to do a few more things. Tiburon's located in Santa Ana, California, about a 5-mile hop from where we're located. But enough talking, let's look at the reels a little bit and talk about those more directly. Alright, basically with the Tiburon SST reels, we have 3 different families of reels here. First would be the 7500 series. That's available in 3 different models. There's a 7524, 7530, and a 7540. The difference being only in the width of the spool and the width of the frame. That's one grouping of reels. I tend to look at these as 40-pound and down. They will fish 50, but typically I'm looking at those as a 40 and down piece. Great casting, a little smaller size, about like an old pin, maybe like a 3.0 in terms of its relative size. And then we move up to the big brothers of the SSTs. One grouping of reels being the SST 6, 8, and 12 in this series, which are again varying only in terms of the width, and they're fully capable of fishing 50 and 60-pound line. Some guys will take them on down to 40. An SST 6 is a real narrow piece. This is the 8 and really is a wonderful size reel. The 12 is like an international 12. And then we move into the higher grouping of reels that are capable of fishing. A lot of guys will be fishing 80-pound, even 100-pound on these guys. There are 3 models. Well, now there are 4 models within this series of reels with the advent of the new 50. But you have a model 16, a 20, a 30, which is basically our 30 wide, topless of course. And then there is a new 50 on the market. I'd love to show you one of those. Those were initially built on a pre-order basis, and we had 6 or 8 of them in, and of course those have all been gobbled up. It's the beginning of long range season. We've got more coming in, and maybe we'll re-edit this video a little bit later when they arrive, because they're a little bit different on the big guns. let me go over a little bit on how these pieces operate. Now, before I forget, if we get into the 7500 series, you'll notice there are no lugs on the top of the frame. When we were in with the bigger brothers, as far from the 6 on up, now we have lugs or plugs here. We're showing the plugs, basically a couple of screws come apart, this piece reverses out, and now we've got lugs to harness in, if that's what you're trying to do. Okay, here's a SST 8, which is a delightful sized reel. I should preface by saying I own 2 of the Tiburon reels. I've got a 16 and I've got a 30, and I've got my heart set on picking up an 8 just because it's such a darn useful size. The reels all cast very, very well. Limited resistance on that spool. They spin as they're supposed to. Great casting reels. Even my 30 surprised the heck out of me. I've used it on long range trips. I've caught big tuna with it, over 200-pound level. Their best on a 30, I think, is probably a little bit over 300 on the yellowfin. Sweet, sweet piece that way. The way a Tiburon reel works is we have a standard lever. These are all 2-speed pieces, but you notice there's no button to push here as far as engaging that low gear ratio or dropping it back into high. It's an automatic shifting reel. Unique in that respect, and rock solid as far as the way she operates. The lever is standard. There is a star here, and the star is like, what in the heck are you doing with the star on a lever drag reel? We'll come back to that. On the other side here is a dial. This dial is used for setting our preset. In other words, we use the dial here in conjunction with the lever, setting our drag at strike at this position. If you need to go to full, you push a button here and you take her all the way up. Okay, pretty simple. Like any lever drag, you only adjust the preset when you're in free spool. The star determines at which point the reel will drop down in gear ratio, or at which point it changes in gear ratio. I tend to fish my star button down, so it only drops down in gear ratio when it needs to, when I'm no longer gaining line back on the fish. The beauty with this is that you're always able to maintain pressure on a big fish. It will ultimately cut your fight time. When the fish is pulling away from you, it's going to drop down in gear ratio automatically. When the fish starts, when you've got the fish's head turned back towards you and it's coming at you, boom, it's going to go ahead and increase the gear ratio. You'll be picking up more line per crank of the handle, and you're maintaining pressure on that fish. The fish does not have time to get, to dissipate that lactic acid and get a second wind. You're putting pressure on the thing the whole time you're fighting the fish, and it's a wonderful piece. A couple of things I mentioned on the website on the tips. I heard one negative from one deckhand on one of the big boats. Say, I don't like those Tiburon reels. I asked him why. He said, doggone it, guys get the fish back in and they're still green. Because you're able to keep this pressure on the fish, you are cutting the fight time down. And from that deckhand's perspective, he felt that, my gosh, these guys get a fish and it's still hot. When I gaff and bring in the boat, that sucker's still flopping around. Well, that's not a bad thing from the fisherman's perspective, maybe from a decky. The other point is, be prepared to reach in your pocketbook again if you buy one. The majority of guys I know that own a Tiburon reel have wound up buying more than one. They're a wonderful piece. You could say they're idiot-proof as far as the shifting, but it's more to it than that, and there are a lot of guys that aren't idiots that love these reels. Tiburon builds a high-quality piece of gear. Simply do. So here's the way the piece looks again. We'll go side to side. Underneath, we've got appropriate drainage here. So when the reel's up, she's draining when it's on the rack. They're well-engineered pieces, and Tiburon, essentially, you've got a lifetime guarantee with this product as far as the guys from Tib are concerned. They are simple to work on, surprisingly. You'd think, oh my gosh, this is a complicated piece of machinery. It's not. All the Tib reels also, of course, use the T-bar handle, so it's offset, it's real comfortable, and it's real powerful. They're made for dealing with bigger fish. The 7500 series I mentioned before, the small guys, that is a beautiful thing to own for fishing wahoo. Nice size for casting duty. I tend to look at those as 40-pound and down pieces. Some people will fish them heavier, but where I want to be more robust, say 40-pound and up, I'm looking at an SST 6, 8, or possibly 12 in that 40, 50, even 60-pound category. If I'm fishing, say, 60 to 80, even 60 to 100, I tend to look at the SST 16, 20, and the 30. On my 30, I loaded 130-pound Spectra, fish it anywhere from 100 on top on up. Typically we'll be using about 30 pounds worth of drag. Tiburon reels didn't get into the drag wars. They have an appropriate amount of drag for how they're being fished. If a person requires more drag, they can be easily modified at the manufacturing level to bump that curve up somewhat. But they have a very smooth drag, excellent performing. The drag itself is actually reversible, which is a nice thing. So you can get added wear out of it should you ever have an issue. It's carbon fiber material, and so chances are you're never going to replace the drag anyway. Let's see, they use a half dozen stainless steel ball bearings. As I mentioned, the shifting point can be adjusted. You have control of that. It's a high torque reel. In other words, high speed is pretty doggone quick on them, and low gear ratio is typically very low for cranking power. You can change the components out relatively easily if you wanted to, change the spools. I know at least one fellow that has a couple of extra spools, and he'll make use of that, spooling them up differently. That's kind of a unique routine. You can open it up from the left or the right side. Some reels you can only get to the left side by going through the right side. That's not the case on the Tibs. I mentioned they are hard anodized. The anodization is something that will help the reel deal with a corrosive saltwater environment. They're also hand polished, of course. They're unique pieces. And that's SST, Smart Shift reels from Tiburon Engineering. They're unique in the marketplace. There's nothing else like them that I'm aware of. I think there was one other auto shifting reel offered by Abu back, maybe in the early 70s, something like that. Worked well, kind of a classic piece, commands quite a bit of money if you're able to find one someday. But these pieces are well proven. When they initially hit the market, they were about $900. Through economies of scale, producing more reels, tying in, with the Okuma guys, there have been some improvements and the pricing's been able to come down. Now we're looking at reels that run about, just under $600 on up to $700 or so, and then we go to the 50s. They initially hit the market for well over $1,000. Now they're about $899 for a 50 narrow, a little more than that for the 50 wide. Great pieces of equipment to own. If you are into bottom fishing, for instance, you only get one whack at a big grouper, or big home guard yellowtail, or it's going to rock you. With these reels, you're able to gain back line. If you're not bit, you've got a high gear ratio you're working with, and if you are, you've got that opportunity to turn the fish's head and bring it on up. For big tuna, wonderful pieces to own. On the wahoo side of things, usually you'd say never fish a 2-speed reel for wahoo. In the case of the 7500 series, I'd say go for it, because you are going to maintain that pressure on the fish. You're not going to have that point like typically on a 2-speed where you're fiddling with, releasing pressure, dropping the gear ratio down by pushing a button, and then in that doing so, you lose the fish. That doesn't happen with the SSTs. The shifting is really, it's the only reel I'm aware of that you can shift under load. It's going to shift, it's made to shift under load. So, again, less things can go wrong, with a reel like that in the middle of a fight. Great pieces to own. Be careful if you buy one, because chances are you're going to reach deep in the pocket again and buy another one. Nice gear. Thanks for watching. We'll do another video here pretty shortly. But the SSTs, if you can swing the deal, own one. Thank you. Bye-bye.